think that's pretty clear. Why would either side sit around and do nothing? I think what we need to do is go back to the previous meeting in Islamabad and look at what actually occurred. The first thing, which I think is very revealing, is that the Iranians showed up with 70 people. They had large numbers of experts in various fields. They were carrying maps, geological surveys. They were loaded for bear, frankly, to discuss in detail what they would accept in terms of conditions and what they would not and what they would negotiate. We showed up with Vice President Vance and Messrs. Witkoff and Kushner, who had previously been judged as unwanted members of the delegation. The Iranians simply said, we regard these people as Israeli assets, and frankly, that's what everybody does see them as. We don't see them as representing American national interests. So they were prepared to talk with Vice President Vance, but not them. Unfortunately, as far as we know, there was otherwise no supporting staff. Now, this is not the first time that this has happened. This happened in Anchorage. The Russians showed up and were prepared for very substantive talks. They brought with them all sorts of material pertaining to Ukraine, current state of affairs, troop locations, recommended solutions, and so forth. We showed up with nothing. And Trump thought that he was going to charm his way into some sort of agreement. As it turned out, he conveyed the impression that we were prepared in the future to do all sorts of things. And it took some time for the Russians to discover that they were being lied to. Now, I think the Iranians know they've been lied to. So what can we expect from this meeting? You have the same people. Are they walking in with anything of substance? Are they prepared to sit there, not for a day or two, but for however long it takes to reach some sort of agreement? I'm very skeptical, and I'm sure that the Iranians are very skeptical. So that's the first part. The second part is, as far as I can tell, and I don't have access to classified information, the Iranians have made it pretty clear that the time for negotiation, as far as they're concerned, is over. They're not interested in talking anymore. Frankly, there was a lot of opposition to signing on for the ceasefire that we wanted. Thanks to Donald Trump and the support from the media that he gets with regard to his public statements, the American people were under the impression that somehow or another we were in the driver's seat. We're not. The strategic initiative firmly rests inside Iranian hands. So at this stage, first of all, I have to see evidence, tangible evidence from the Iranians that they have agreed to show up. Otherwise, my assumption is Vance and the two assets will fly in and meet with themselves. But right now, there's just nothing from the Iranian government that substantiates the willingness to participate in the meeting. Then finally, this point, the Iranians aren't asking for this meeting. And contrary to what Donald Trump says, they don't need a deal. That's a bunch of crap. Donald Trump, I think, is finally beginning to come to terms with reality that he's responsible for sending the world into what is likely going to be, at best, a deep recession and more likely a depression. We're headed to a recession, and the question now is how bad is it going to get? And we can talk more about that in the future during the hour, but I think the American people just have been blindsided, and Trump blindsides everybody over and over and over again with nonsense. So it's very hard for the average American citizen to sort truth from reality. But the reality is there's no evidence the Iranians are going to show up, and there's no evidence that any sort of agreement is going to be reached. Dropside News, by the way, is doing a great job. And I have to commend the work of Jeremy Scahill, because he's very, very clear and unambiguous when he says something. And if he doesn't know or doesn't have the information, he doesn't say anything. Again, I wish we had that from the White House. Dan, I'm afraid that Donald Trump is in an extremely dangerous position. You'll recall just a week or two ago, I said, and I think I said it to several people, Donald Trump is beginning to realize that he faces national humiliation here at home and international humiliation abroad. He's walked into a giant bear trap and he's stuck, and there's no easy way out. One of the things that I think is most important for everybody to understand right now is that Donald Trump has single-handedly reversed the Green Revolution. Now, a lot of Americans today don't understand what that was. But the truth is, in the aftermath of World War II, we developed fertilizers, exceptional fertilizers, ways to grow food that we had not had previously. This green revolution allowed hundreds of millions, actually billions of people to live an infinitely better life. And naturally, that also meant they could reproduce. The global south right now is in terrible shape, whether it's Vietnam, the Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia. All of these countries now are suffering. One of the reasons they're suffering is because 50% of the world's supply of urea comes from the Middle East, comes through the Persian Gulf. Iran alone is the second largest global supplier. Global urea production is roughly 220 million tons a year. And why is it produced in such large quantities? Well, that's because other than ammonia, urea has the largest and highest nitrogen content of all industrial chemicals. The point is that these fertilizers with nitrogen and phosphate combined with urea are coming from major suppliers like Qatar and Saudi Arabia. And sulfur, nearly 50% of the world's sulfur exports pass through the strait. We talk all the time about oil. Yes, oil is a problem. Roughly 10 million to perhaps 13 million barrels of oil globally are missing. But it's not just oil. It's all of these petroleum products and those things connected with it. I think Donald Trump is taking phone calls now, and if he isn't, then somebody else in his office is, from world leaders telling him, look, whatever you think you were going to accomplish, it hasn't worked. The world is in a lot of trouble. You've got to get out of this, because if you don't, we're going to face famine around the world in many key areas in the global south. We're probably going to go into a depression. That's particularly true in Europe right now. There is unrest all over Europe's major capitals. We've seen it finally in Berlin. We see it in Great Britain. We see it in France and Italy and Spain. You know, the bottom line is this can't go on. And he doesn't want to admit the truth that the Navy has lost control of the global sea routes. It's lost control of the Strait of Hormuz, although it really never had it. And Middle East energy infrastructure is being destroyed. And the Iranians have made it abundantly clear, if you attack us this next time around, try to wipe out our oil infrastructure, try to destroy our desalination plants, we will respond in kind to the west coast of the Persian Gulf. And that would be devastating to the world. In fact, many of those areas may never come back as they once were. I doubt it seriously.
And, you know, Doug, to that point here, I just recalled something. Sorry, Gary, I didn't get a chance to give you this morning, but this is Christine Lagarde talking about that exact issue inside of Europe.
What's happening in the energy world. So if the disruption persists long enough, the adjustment shifts from prices, which we are putting up with now, to possibly rationing with very different economic consequences. Higher prices are primarily inflationary. Shortages hit output directly and are worse for growth. Overall, there have been so far limited signs of supply chain disruption, both globally and in the euro area. But local tensions are visible. Jet fuel prices have roughly doubled since the outbreak of the conflict, and rationing has been imposed at some individual airports in Europe since early April. And I'm not talking about what's happening in the rest of the world. I'm just back from the IMF and the World Bank spring meetings, like many of you, and you might have bumped into colleagues from Asia, in particular some of the low-income countries or emerging market economies that are taking a much more severe hit than.
And that's exactly what you just said there. And so she's validated that. But you see that she is very, very worried about that problem. So what does that tell you about what these negotiate? Because that seems to put a real motivation on getting something done pretty quick, or these things are going to start really manifesting.
Well, I think she's worried about something she didn't mention, and that is that most of the governments that we see in Europe's capitals, places like London, Paris, Berlin, and so forth, are going to be swept away. These are the globalist elites that have been driving us into disaster, starting in February of 2022 with the stupid war against the Russians in support of this corrupt regime in Kiev, in the hopes that Russia could be harmed. That failed miserably. We have largely sustained our support for it, unfortunately. but we're no longer talking about it. It has escaped a lot of notice inside the United States. The Russians certainly haven't forgotten about it. And I think then you have to go to the Persian Gulf business. And everybody assumed that this was going to be over in a few days. There was no chance of that. The Iranians have been preparing for decades to deal with this issue. And they have stockpiled a great deal, not just weapons and ammunition, but other things that they need to survive. And their population is firmly behind them. All this nonsense about the population rising up has gone away. So I think she's saying, look, we're all in trouble. We, the elites that are responsible for the debacle that we are in right now, are finally going to be held accountable because we can't do the minimums. What are the minimums? You have to protect the population, shelter the population, feed the population. That's what people in all the Western countries expect their governments to secure for them. We're failing. Now, we haven't failed as miserably yet, but I think we're going to start experiencing these problems. And I think before the summer's out, there's going to be widespread unrest in the United States. Because let's face it, let's assume we stopped today. We just sailed away and said, that's it, we're out. Well, that would not resolve most of the problems and the disputes that we have with the Iranians, but it would at least open the strait up. But the fact that we're blockading the place means that's not going to happen as long as we're blockading. So what are the other options? Negotiate something? You're dealing with a country right now that is firmly in control. It occupies a strategic high ground. It controls the Strait of Hormuz. They're not giving it up. So then what do? Do you go in and viciously attack the place, hope that this time around you can succeed in destroying the entire country? That's what it sounds like to me. And I don't think that's going to work. So at the end of the day, we're probably going to end up disengaging, withdrawing, looking terrible. But instead of rescuing the globe, the global south, everybody in Europe, Asia, from what is a terrible, terrible situation, will get a little out of it. In other words, instead of 10 years, 5 to 10 years to recover from the damage we're doing right now, we may recover from it in 2 years or 1.5 years or something. But I just don't see that happening, Dan. I don't see President Trump being the person that he is, ever admitting under any circumstances that he was wrong. We just stop and look at this nonsense with putting his face on the face of Christ and then being confronted over it. And he lies and says, oh, I thought I was being like a physician, a doctor. The man doesn't have the common sense and the character to simply say, look, I made a mistake. That was in bad taste. It was wrong. I should never have done it. I apologize to everyone who voted for me, who's part of my base, and to all Americans who may be Christians. That was inappropriate. It was a very easy thing for him to do. It's easy if you are a person of character and integrity. But if you're someone who builds on one lie after the next, and that's what I think we're hearing right now about these ephemeral negotiations, you can't do that. And I'm afraid that we're going to be dragged into this major war, and this war is going to finish off the economy globally.
And you know, Matt, if there's any hope that you were wrong, that would seem to be knocked out by what I'm about to show you. Now, you saw Professor Ahmadian talking about here's where, frankly, the Iranian side is, and he specifically referred to what you did about the control of the Strait of Hormuz as being their big strategic leverage point. He unequivocally said that. So he also laid out what the Iranian side is going to, if there are negotiations, what they're going to require, which are really big pockets here. On the other side of this, you have General Jack Keane laid out, and apparently he gets on the phone frequently to President Trump, and I'm told that he listens to him. Here's what he thinks are going to be the terms.
Our demands are pretty formidable. I mean, we want them to give up the enriched uranium, dismantle all of their capabilities to enrich uranium, and we'll have to be there to verify that. We don't want any enrichment to take place inside of Iran. The second thing is removal of certainly their hold on the Straits of Hormuz and a public declaration to that. When it comes to sanctions, I think what we have to do is recognize their behavior. They say one thing, but what they do is really the critical thing. We have to have anytime, anywhere inspections, but we don't remove sanctions until we are able to verify that there's actually behavior change.
So, Doug, I mean, just to be logical for a second, is there any scenario that you can even wildly think about to where this Iranian side, with the control of the Strait of Hormuz in their fist, are going to say, sure, we're going to give up what Ahmadian just said that they would never give up, their reprocessed material. We're going to hand over control of the strait, and we're not going to ask for any reparations until we prove to your satisfaction that we're going to do something. So, but sure, here's the strait. I mean, that's so irrational, it's to almost be comic.
In Philadelphia, we have an 8-letter word for what General Keane just mentioned. I'll be polite and say it's nonsense. The problem with everything that the man says is that it's based on fantasy. The supposition is part of the, ideological fantasy that's being fed to the American people. We're the best, we're the greatest, we can do anything. They have no choice but to submit or we destroy them. Well, that's not going to work. That's the first thing. It's just not going to work. Secondly, why would you do anything for us at this point without tangible, concrete willingness to negotiate through the 10 points that the Iranians laid out? We're not a reliable negotiating partner, Dan. We lie. You show up, you may be killed during the negotiations. We cheat. We're not honest. And our response is that the Iranians lie and cheat all the time. I've talked to people that were inspectors. I've talked to people that have been involved over there, and they say the opposite is the case. I remember going through this in the Balkans, and people kept insisting the Serbs were dishonest. You couldn't trust anything they say. I found just the opposite. Of the 3 parties, the Bosniaks, the Croats, and the Serbs were scrupulously honest. If they said they were going to do something, they did it. If they said they wouldn't, they wouldn't. If they were going to show up, they did. This business of constantly demonizing your opponent really makes it very hard to come to some sort of arrangement that terminates the hostilities. And that's effectively what we're doing. We go back to World War II, this World War II nostalgia where nobody actually knows what the hell happened during the Second World War and just how difficult the whole thing was. But we act as though we were the great ones who solved everything, won everything, determined everything. Nothing could be further from the truth. But one of the things tragically that we did is that we so completely demonized our opponents that we made it possible to destroy them completely, to the point where we had to spend 50 years compensating for the destruction of the power they once held. This business of now setting out to destroy Iran because they refuse to accept our terms is equally insane. Only this time around, Iran is in a far better position than we realize. And the Chinese and the Russians and many others are very interested not only in seeing Iran successful and survive, but they want Iran to be a partner in the future with regard to the Strait of Hormuz. We've mentioned this before. The Dardanelles was a failure. The British at least had the presence of mind to come to the Montreux Convention and sign over the rights to determine who goes through or doesn't go through based on very clear, unambiguous conditions to the Turks. There hasn't been a problem in the Straits of with the Convention of Montreux since 1926. It's worked very well, but we insist that we should be the ones to make the determination, and we readily admit that, but for a few items, we're not really that dependent on the Persian Gulf. The rest of the world is. None of this makes any sense, and we're headed for a serious, serious fall. And I think we have to look at the rest of the region. People are not paying attention to what's going on in Turkey. People are not paying attention to Egypt. These countries are gearing up for some action. I don't know exactly when, where, and how, and under what circumstances, but the whole region is turning against us. And we would do well to ignore these so-called Epstein elites that govern the Emirates and places like that in Saudi Arabia. These people are finished. The populations there know they're corrupt and evil and want nothing to do with them. We need to start thinking about our place in the world, not as the world's dictator, but as a participant in what really is a multipolar world, and a world in which there are multiple great powers, and start dealing with people on the basis of mutual respect, not bullying. But that's not going to happen with this president. That's pretty clear.
It's not. And in fact, I would go so far as to say is nobody in power right now. Even you could say the Biden administration in some ways was even worse at the senior level, though that's a hard standard to go beneath. But there was a comment here by an Israeli analyst here that I thought was really poignant. His name is Danny Citrinowicz, sorry if I didn't pronounce that right, really, I think quantifies why we're in this trouble. He said Washington still doesn't understand Iran. Yet again, we are seeing evidence of how poorly Washington understands the Iranian regime. The persistent belief that a single decisive move like a naval blockade, strikes on critical infrastructure, or even targeting and killing senior officials could fundamentally change Tehran's behavior reflects a profound misreading of their system. This point cannot be stressed enough. When faced with a choice between conceding to U.S. demands and escalating a confrontation, it believes it can manage and even win. Iran's decision is not difficult to predict. It will not capitulate. And then I think even the more important things, he said there is no scenario in which one dramatic move forces the Iranian regime to raise a white flag. No pressure campaign, not military actions, and not symbolic shows of force. And yet American polity continues to go after that elusive silver bullet, meaning a single action that will deliver a quick, decisive victory. That search is bound to fail. And I mean, he wrote that, but I mean, it's stuff that you've said many times. But that just goes to show, and whether we're talking Jack Keane, Mike Pompeo, General Keith Kellogg et al., Trump, all these folks, Rubio, Hegseth, they all seem to be of this same, I don't know what you call blindness or self-delusion, but something as an elite cohort, they seem unable to come to what it seems to me to be common sense.
Well, there's a documentary that one can watch on YouTube about Secretary of Defense McNamara, and it's all about Vietnam. And what does he say at the conclusion? We just did not understand their culture. We did not understand the opponent. Well, the sad truth of the matter is there were large numbers of people before 1965, during the Vietnam War, and afterwards who absolutely understood, gave excellent advice, and they were ignored. It wasn't a question of not understanding. It's not wanting to hear the message. That's a big problem in Washington. It's not that there aren't people who know what they're talking about. It's just that there are people that don't care. And President Trump and his so-called advisors, this little circle around him, fall into that category. And I think we have to understand that also characterizes most of the senior military leadership, because I listen to all sorts of nonsense from people about, well, he's a general and he must know, he's an admiral. Come on, give me a break. These people are not there because of demonstrated character, competence, or intelligence. They're there because of their readiness to go along. Say, yes, sir, 3 bags full, let's move out. We got to come to terms with the reality that if you create a culture that favors and advances the sycophant, you're not going to penetrate the inner circle unless you're prepared to go in there and tell the president or whomever is in charge whatever the dickens he wants to hear. That's the bad news. I don't see any of that changing. Maybe the disaster that's looming on the horizon will have an impact. I don't know.
And if anybody's in doubt about what's going to happen with that, because I mean, we have some near-term pressure points. Number one is time, because the ceasefire period runs out at the end of tonight. So tomorrow, U.S. time, then he's going to have to make a decision. President Trump is, do you go back to bombing like he said in that opening clip that we said? He said, yeah, I'm planning on it. Or do you extend it out and trying to do something that makes sense? But according to what Jack Keane's saying, we're going down something that is literally the polar opposite of what they're even willing to contemplate. And then the guy that's going to be making that decision, of course, is President Trump. And he had this True Social out, which he posted right after that conversation there. And he was complaining about the Democrats and people who didn't give him credit for Operation Midnight Hammer working. And he says here, we totally obliterated the nuclear dust locations to the point to where bloodthirsty Iran has been unable to get at it or dig it out. Space Force has cameras on every inch of the 3 sites that we so brilliantly hit last June. I don't think he realizes, number one, that realization would seem to prove that there's no reason for this war at all, because it was allegedly to keep them from getting nuclear weapons, which was imminent. But you just told us that it's buried. And so there's no possibility for that, number one. And then number two, in that same conversation, I hadn't seen any commentary on this, but it was alarming to me, because he said in the course of that, if I had been president during the Vietnam War or during Afghanistan, we would have won it easily, which means I think in his mind, he's thinking, I can win this one easily too. And if he thinks he can win this militarily, Doug, then he may make some really bad decision here in the next 24, 36 hours.
Well, keep in mind that this is someone who knows absolutely nothing about military affairs. And he's dealing with people who are overwhelmingly air power fanatics. And then you have some special ops types, and the Special Operations Command has more than its share of people that are willing to go to war at the drop of a hat, especially if they think they can play a role. I hate to be frank, but I was in for 28 years, and for everybody that was sober-minded, there were at least 2 or 3 that were ready to yeehaw, let's go. And I think that's part of the problem. There are still people in uniform who are saying, well, if we do the following things, if we penetrate deeply, we can go find this enriched uranium. We can identify it. If we can't get it out, then we can target it and destroy it. They miss the larger point. Nobody is thinking about the larger issues. That's why the commentary at the beginning about the global economy and the danger that is approaching right now around the planet is something that doesn't even show up in any of the president's commentary or speeches. The farmers collectively in the United States sent a letter to Trump. I've forgotten the name of the agricultural organization that represented them, but it was a very interesting letter. It was very sound and very straightforward, and said, look, if you keep this up, it's going to destroy us. We won't survive it. It's not just fertilizer. It's a whole range of things that are important to farming. You would think that if you're hearing from farmers collectively in the United States, the people that grow our food, and they were asking you to reconsider, you would do so. But this ultimately is not about them. It's not about anything but Donald Trump. We've got to go back to Roy Cohn and Roy Cohn's systematic brainwashing of Donald Trump as a young man. And Donald Trump has gotten away with lots of things. I mean, the man's declared bankruptcy 6 times in his life. He's turned it into a business model. And what did he do after declaring bankruptcy? Washes his hands and walks away. I mean, I've run into people all over the United States that tell me, I used to work at the casino that Trump had, and I'm one of X number of people that were never paid, that nothing was ever done for us. We were supposed to have this, that, and the next thing. And I said, well, I'm very sorry to hear that. And they say to me, well, you're on TV. Can you help me? What can I tell these people? I can't. And I think Donald Trump is still the marketing genius that he always was. He's a con man. He sold everybody a bill of goods. Now he's in a very difficult position, and he's going to ask the U.S. military to rescue him. That's where we're headed, because I don't think this meeting will occur. And even if it does, it's not going to produce anything, in which case he'll then bomb, because that's what his ego demands. Asking him to step down or step away from a bad decision with terrible strategic implications for us and the rest of the world is not something he's going to even understand. In his mind, anything that he says has to be a victory. Anything he does is a victory. Anything he does works. He's the greatest. Just ask him. He'll tell you ad infinitum. And unfortunately, in our society, we tend to value those people. We listen to people say, well, I'm the greatest. And listen, there's nobody that knows more about this than I do. Yeah, right. In other societies, people are put off by that. When people exercise some humility in the United States, they say, what's wrong with this guy? I think we've now gotten a dose of medicine that, quite frankly, is being overdue for some time. I hope this is the last of it, and I hope that when this is over, he and everybody else in Washington will be swept away. Because the thing to keep in mind is that all of these people in the government are part of this disaster. How many times have people on the Hill stood up and outlined in detail all the critical strategic reasons why this is a bad idea and should not be followed? Very rarely. I mean, you can talk about Rouhana, and you can talk about Thomas Massey. Marjorie Taylor Greene eventually came around to this. There are some others, but remarkably few. So the entire Beltway is this poisonous, stagnant pool of people obsessed with one thing, and that is enriching themselves. And quite frankly, whatever else happens doesn't matter as long as the donors can keep them in their office. And that's what it comes down to. How many times have we heard somebody say, look, voters don't win elections, donors win elections? That says something about this thing we call democracy that leaves much to be desired.
Indeed, it does. And I want to look at because you mentioned if these talks happen. So I'm showing you here, this is their senior negotiator, Ghalibaf, who's their Speaker of the Islamic Parliament. This is the only thing he has posted so far today. They'll sell war to make what great again? Inflation, unaffordability, oligarchs, etc. That's very interesting because he still has not addressed whether or not they're going to even have these negotiations. That's an odd thing for him to post. Something else that was odd by Professor Morandi, whom I think you know. He posted this, and as you'll see on the timestamp there, it was right about the time President Trump finished speaking this morning. And his statement, everyone should immediately leave the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi, and Kuwait. Sailors on ships in the Persian Gulf must be prepared to evacuate their ships. This is especially urgent for ships near the Strait of Hormuz, which will be destroyed first. Time is running out. I texted him back as soon as I saw that, and I said, well, given that there's supposed to be talks today, is there a subtle message here? And he actually replied just a second ago, and he said that unless Trump changes course, there will be no talks. And he goes, yes, and I think you're absolutely correct that this is a situation that everybody is preparing for conflict and renewed fighting. So the Iranians still have not officially said they were going to join it. He's not officially. He told us that last time he was on the show. He said, I'm not connected with the government, but he clearly is connected to folks who are. And so I think we have to take that very seriously. And I mean, it sounds self-evident, but what does that tell you about what's coming within the next 2 or 3 days?
Well, he's reaffirming what the Iranians have said they would do, which is if you attack us on the scale that you're promising and you hit the targets that you say you're going to hit, then we are going to strike the west coast of the Persian Gulf from the border between UAE and Oman all the way up to Kuwait. And we are going to incinerate, destroy, annihilate, use whatever, fancy terms that Donald Trump likes to talk in terms of. And that's what they're going to do. And when that happens, you're talking about a very long time before things are rebuilt. And it makes it absolutely clear that the status quo is no longer sustainable. And I think people need to understand that one of the things that the Iranians want is they want us out of the Gulf. We have tried to encircle Iran. After having encircled the Soviet Union, at least in terms of containment, we seem to think that that was the answer for everything. And so this containment strategy, which was never supposed to be hopelessly militarized, is now the preferred option. We've tried to surround Iran. We're talking about containing China, which is astonishing. If you look at the size of China and its population, its importance. By the way, if you could turn to that chart that I sent earlier today very briefly, there's something that Americans need to understand. Pushing up borrowing costs everywhere except in China. Now, what does that mean? What that means is that China is stable. China is the world's creditor now, not the United States. And China is becoming the global safe haven for wealth, not the United States. Just look at the lines, where they go. What does this mean to the bonds, the treasuries? It means that the yields are rising. They have to rise or you can't attract any investment. That's unsustainable. So quite frankly, I think regardless of what Trump does at this stage, we've seen the end of the petrodollar. That's done. We're going to see probably the yuan petro or the petro basket of currencies or something else, but the petrodollar is finished. That is a huge foundational stone for our prosperity in the world. And, Americans need to understand that what we've done is destroy ourselves with this war. Whatever damage we think we've done to Iran, the long-term strategic damage to our country and to the rest of the world is far greater. Iran will survive. Iran will come back. There's no doubt about it. Just as Russia has survived and Russia has come roaring back. China is going to survive and China's roaring back. In fact, China is now the world's largest economy, not the United States. And we've made matters worse because we constantly seem to opt for the threats of military power because that apparently is the only tool we've got left. Well, we threatened everyone with tariffs. That's backfired badly. I don't see that we benefited from any of that. This president is all about bullying and threats, and it's back to the Roy Cohn School of Business. Number one, deny everything, admit nothing. Number two, threaten everybody, attack all the time. And finally, whatever happens, declare victory, claim that you've got control, that you're in charge, and everything's just fine. When Trump is driven out of office as a result of all of this, and I think it's inevitable at this stage, he's going to be making the same speech on his way out. I'm great. Everything was better under me, and we've been wildly successful. Thanks. No thanks. He's finished.
And I have a little bit more breaking news now. The Pezeshkian, president of Iran, he has made a post on X, and he says the level of understanding and comprehension of the requesters from Iran regarding their presence in Islamabad is even lower than Trump's level of understanding and comprehension, ... That's all he says. He didn't say we're not going. He didn't say we are going. He just seems to mock those who thinks that there's going to be talks. I mean, that seems to be in line with other things we've heard. So it seems to imply, again, that there won't even be any talks. So there's nothing for Vice President Vance to go over there for. So we seem to be heading in a bad direction. I want to go down a path a little bit more in addition to what you just said there, which was profound and by itself economically should sound all the alarm bells to do what you suggested. But there's also the issue of the oil itself. First of all, the last oil tanker that left on February 27th before the war started has now reached its destination. Now the market has to burn through about 400 million barrels of release from very strategic reserves. And once that's through, then you can't have this, even this market manipulation that President Trump has genuinely been amazing at to keep it under or right around $100. That's running out because all of the props are going to come out, and there's a physical dearth of supply that you can't manage. And then that is turning into physical. These are in just the last day or two. Some of these today. Popular Airlines reduces air flights and cancels others until June 14th. Singapore jet fuels have doubled to an average of around 960 barrels so far in April compared to 182. LA flights out of LA have been canceled due to high flight. That's just yesterday. So this is going to continue on. And you talked about the fertilizer issue, which then has compounding problems for a harvest season. And then that means the food that's going to be over the remainder of the following year into 27. I mean, Doug, these are serious issues that are these compound problems are compounding by the day.
Well, it's been amateur hour in the White House and amateur hour on the Hill. None of these people have the intellectual or professional depth to do their jobs. That's the simplest explanation for the terrible position we put ourselves in. It's just that now the so-called curtain is being pulled back. The rest of the world recognizes us for what we are. We're not serious. We're not a serious country. And I'm afraid that that's the widespread opinion of us. And for Americans, what they need to understand, this is analogous to living in a house and watching one of your tenants in the house burn the other one half of the house down. And then the fire is put out. And everybody says, well, thank God the fire's out. At least we've got half a house left. And he says, oh, no, wait. I've got matches. I can burn the rest down. And people say, okay, well, if you think you need to, go ahead and do that. And that's what his supporters in the MAGA movement, whatever number are left, that's effectively what they're saying. Oh, I think it's great what he's doing. He needs to get those guys and kill them. And oh, my God. And, of course, most of these people have never pulled a trigger in their lives and never shot anything. Maybe Bambi, if that, but that's all. It's depressing, but that's where we are now. And I wish there was some good news, but I just don't see any. And, the fuel business is going to come home to hit us hard. We're going to have unrest in this country through most of the summer. All the usual suspects that were out there before will be out there again, only this time. I think you're going to see the citizenry that has been asleep and been trusting the words of people in Washington for too long also go out on the street. And I think that's going to be very rough.
Yeah, especially when those manifesting problems start occurring here and shelves are empty, prices for what's there is more than they can afford. Obviously, gasoline will be going up through the roof. That's when I think you're going to start seeing some of that stuff. But let me ask you just kind of on the near term here. I showed you this chart earlier that showed that we have more naval power in the region than we had even at the start of the war. There's more air power. We've been restocking missiles. And let's take a look at this is what happened during the first 40 days. You see these are the attacks by U.S. and Israel against Iran. And so there was a considerable amount, caused lots of damage, at least to anything above ground. And then you look at what the Iranians were able to do in response. And so it's obviously at a much lower rate, but it was sustained all the way through in large part because of the underground facilities, et cetera. And yet that limited stuff. This is what it had on our aircraft alone. All these are losses, either destroyed or damaged, et cetera. So the question is going to be now, if we go in, and President Trump is good on his word on this, and the one thing he has been good on is using military power. If this is true and there is no meeting at all, much less a successful one, then he goes back to the military. What can we expect then out of this additional firepower that's different from what we saw the other side or the first half?
Well, first of all, I'm not in on the discussions, and I'm not sitting in the war room, and I haven't seen any plans. I don't expect to receive any calls to inform me. So the best that I can tell you is that we will do what we did the last time, only we will do it with greater gusto. We will pick some new targets on the assumption, and that's my assumption, that based upon the intelligence studies of the last round, they're finding some new targets to attack. And you remember that the key to all of these air and missile campaigns is very much the same. Somebody walks in and says, okay, boss, I've been back over these targets. We've gone through them. We put them through AI. We've analyzed them. We're confident now that we've got the right set of targets. In addition to most of the ones we hit before, we've now got these new ones. We think this is the answer. In other words, you put enough rounds out there, eventually you're going to hit something that counts. I don't think that works, and I've seen that happen before. It's back to World War II. You know, we bombed all sorts of things trying to destroy production. German production never slowed down. But what we did succeed in doing, and we never fully appreciated it until nearly the war was over, was destroy the fuel production and distribution system, because that was key to stopping the German army and the German Air Force. That was vital. That did more to help the Soviets and their millions of troops reach Berlin than almost anything else we did. Now, I don't know what they're coming up with now, but I think they're going to have a tough time. As we've said before, Iran is a natural fortress. It's enormous inside. It's much larger than Germany was, much larger than Japan. It's the size, half the size of India. And that means the size of Western Europe. So the notion that you're going to find something now to hit that's going to change the outcome, I think, is unlikely. Now, I don't know what's going to happen with the ground troops. My impression is that President Trump, giving credit for getting something right, even a broken clock is right twice a day, he seems to have objected to the use of ground troops. I don't know who is arguing for the seizure of islands in the Persian Gulf, whether it's Karg or Abu Musa or whatever the things they are looking at. Doesn't make any difference. I think it's a waste of time. I don't think it changes anything. I don't see how putting soldiers or Marines on the ground in these places is going to demonstrate that we control anything. It's not going to wrest control away from Iran. And Iran still has 45 to 50,000, I would say, drones, and probably 15 to 20,000 or more missiles. Those things are precision guided. They're going to get through, and they're going to target wherever we are, whatever we do. So I hope that he sticks with his opposition to the use of ground troops, because I just don't see any payoff for their use in this setting at all. And I think we'll lose a lot unnecessarily. But we don't know what the great men that make these decisions are saying. And remember, President Trump is the sort of man that if he hears something he likes, he leans over right away and says, oh, yeah, I like that, without understanding what he really was told. And so I don't know what Special Operations Command is saying. I don't know what the various service chiefs are saying. I don't know what the CENTCOM commander, Admiral Cooper, is saying. Who knows? And I would be very careful about all these things in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. I think some of what they print is probably true. But unless you were in the room and you not only heard what was said, but you could see the people saying these things, you can't really pass judgment.
Well, the only thing we can pass judgment on is what they do. And I guess we're going to be finding out here pretty shortly where all this goes, because it doesn't have a lot of, doesn't give anybody a lot of hope that anything positive for either the United States or the global economy is in the offing. But as always, we're very grateful to you for coming on and sharing your viewpoints with us. So at the very least, nobody can say they didn't know what was coming. So we thank you for that.
Okay. Thanks, Dan.
And we appreciate you guys too. We're going to try and be back to you later this afternoon. We have some other things to talk about. There's some other developments that have been happening we didn't have time for here, but look for it somewhere around 3:30 p.m. probably. We'll see you then on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Don't forget to tell your friends, the ones that love to listen to podcasts. Get them to add Daniel Davis Deep Dive to their podcast list. They need to know what you know. They can get it to where they already get their podcast. You just got to tell them.
Okay.
Hehehehe